Hello, hello. Welcome officially to the Unlapped podcast. I'm Nicole Briscoe. We've got Laurence Edmondson. We've got Nate Saunders joining us. They're in Australia because they're the cool kids. I'm not, and that's fine. But it's lovely to see you guys. We'll check in with the conditions in Australia in a second because I'm sure it's probably a little bit nicer there than it is here in Connecticut, and I'm not at all jealous. But first of all, remember, if you're watching on YouTube, like the video. Subscribe to the new ESPN F1 channel. If you're listening somewhere else, give us a 5-star review. Just hit us up with all the love. And remember, you can find us on that ESPN F1 channel all season long for all of your F1 content. Guys, you made it. The first race of the season is officially here. How's Australia?
It's on a very different time zone. That's for sure. I feel like half of my brain has made it here. The other half is somewhere, I don't know, halfway around the world. But it's always fantastic. It's great to be here because for a while now, this hasn't been the opening race. And in my mind, Australia should be the opening race because it's a fantastic city here in Melbourne. The organisers of the race put on a fantastic show, and there's just something about it that's right. And so I'm delighted that F1 is back here for season opener, and really, I feel like it should be here every year. But yeah, it's fantastic to be down here, definitely.
All right, are we ready for the season?
Absolutely.
Let's go.
It was Labor Day here yesterday, and there was a big parade happening downtown, and the amount of F1 merch and hats and stuff that you could see was great. Like, and it feels like there's a buzz around the place for the season to start.
I can't wait. This is one of the most enjoyable episodes that we get to do because this is where we get to have our official 2025 hot takes and predictions. And some of them are going to be wild. Some of them are going to be like, well, duh. But I want to just jump in right away with something that we may have already talked about this season on Unlapped. But the first person to lose their seat this year will be blank. And that's how all of this is going to go. We're just going to throw out like a sentence or a fill in the blank. And then we'll just see if we agree. Go. First person to lose their seat is...
It will come as no surprise that I think both of us, although Nate, feel free to take your own route, is going to say Jack Doohan, which is sad, right? Because it's his home race kicking off. He's got his first full season at Alpine. His whole career, as is the case with any rookie coming into F1 or young driver coming into F1, has been leading to this point. And yet we have the knowledge that Franco Colapinto has been signed over the winter into a reserve driver role. It seems quite clear that you don't sign Colapinto, get him out of that Williams contract, or at least on a kind of loan deal from Williams, without the intention of running him in the car at some point. And they've already signed a big South American sponsor. Of course, Franco is from Argentina. And so you just feel that the time is already ticking on Doohan's potentially his career, but certainly his participation in the season. I think the big question, Nate, which I'm going to throw to you, unless you have someone else, is when does it happen?
Yeah, I would say but my answer would be Doohan. I was actually just looking at this when we had the rundown, and there's like some years you're looking like, oh, there's a few people maybe, you always look at the Red Bull guys, but yeah, I think Doohan. I'd be surprised if he's still in the car by Miami myself. Just given what we're hearing.
Mm-hmm.
And then given that
because of the South American ties.
Yes, exactly. So and that seems to be the first time it can really have an impact on Alpine's kind of bottom line. So I would say there, but Alpine really haven't helped that situation. They haven't really put themselves in a position where you can say anything else but so that it will be doing. So hope I'm wrong though. It'd be nice if he proved everyone wrong and kept his seat, but looks very unlikely.
I will say this. I think it would be nice if he was given the opportunity to prove everyone wrong, because in some ways it already feels like the writing is so much on the wall that he won't actually be given a fair shake. He won't actually be allowed the time, because let's be honest, your rookie season in Formula One is not easy. There's so much to learn. There's always, a margin for error as a rookie that is far greater. Like, it just exists more often there than it does for like people who've been on the grid for 4 or 5 years. I just don't think he's going to be allowed that sort of like opportunity. And I think because his leash is so short, like the first time he makes anything that could even be considered borderline egregious, like...
Just imagine the pressure of that, because going into a midfield team as a rookie is tricky enough. The first lap in Melbourne, if he qualifies well, it'll probably be somewhere in Q2, so somewhere from 11th to 15th. You've got all this stuff going on around you. And in the back of your mind, you're like, if I get involved in an accident, even if it's not my fault, this is going to be disastrous for my career right from the off. Whereas a driver who has been given, you know, kind of reassurance, both privately and publicly, that they will have the seat for the whole season, you know, they can take some of that pressure off that first race, but right from the start, it's going to be there. And then that will really show, you know, how mentally strong Doohan is, because if he can then survive all that and score some good results, that is going to put him actually on a level even higher, I think, and make it even harder for Alpine to justify the switch if it happens. But yeah, I think that pressure going into that first few races, and they come so quickly this year. You've got Australia this weekend, then China the next weekend, one weekend off, and then Japan, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, all 3 weekends in a row. So it's just no time to breathe, no time to reflect, no time to kind of learn from the mistakes. And I just think it's a really, really horrible position to be in for him.
Before we move on, I actually wonder if there's some element of the schedule that might actually be good for him. Because if you do make a mistake because you're moving on to the next race so quickly, you don't have time to dwell on it. You don't have time to think about it and sort of like get in your head and get in your own way about it, because you do have to go from Australia to Japan. And then obviously there is that one break in there, but it's because it's just so quick. It seems like less time to think, which sometimes can be a good thing. This next one, I'm going to blame Dave Presley for this one, because it's so like you could take the world's ease. This is like the world's easiest question. Blank will outperform their teammate. I almost feel like being like, guys, we can't say Max. You can't. Max is off the table.
Yeah.
We can't say Max.
Yeah. I think if it's got to be a hot take surprise, like the first one that jumped to my mind, and I've been interested, like, I think I would say Ollie Behrman will outperform Esteban Ocon. I think because just the talent of Behrman, I actually really rate Ocon as well. But I don't know. I just feel like him going into that team, I think that will be a really close fight between those two. So I'm going to put my neck on the line. Bit of classic British media bias to kick us off with. But yeah, that would be my hot take. Not a knock on Ocon, but I'm just a big fan of what Behrman brings to the table.
I have one. Leclerc is going to outperform Lewis Hamilton.
Nice.
I think there's a lot for that. I think that's an obvious one that a lot of people want the answer to as well, isn't it? Who's going to come out on top in that Ferrari battle? But you can make a case for either. But I think just because Leclerc has that experience there already, 6 years under his belt at the team, you know, just a knowledge of how that car in this regulation set works. Lewis is facing a huge uphill battle there, and I think, you know, you can get very excited about Lewis being there, and I think there will be moments of absolute brilliance. But across the whole season, to beat Leclerc is a huge challenge, and especially if these first few races he's still getting up to speed, which it seemed like he was in testing. It seemed like not everything had quite clicked into place, and there were still some issues with the car on the final day, which wasn't really Lewis's fault, but still just things that were working slightly against him. And if that continues into the first race, again, the other thing about Australia being the first round is that it's a track where a lot of stuff happens, a lot of incidents happen. You know, a tiny mistake can be catastrophic in qualifying or even in practice early on, as Williams found out last year when they lost one of their cars for the weekend. So, you know, so stuff like that happens. And so I feel like Lewis has got to be inch perfect just to be able to match Leclerc at the start of the season. And then whether he can then do that and build enough over the year is interesting.
Okay, next one. This is more of the constructors conversation, but blank will be the most improved constructor this season.
I'm going to jump in with Williams.
Yeah.
Might be a slightly obvious one, but I think the amount of work that's gone on in the background over the past 2 years, basically since James Vowles came in as team principal there, is huge. And while it's mainly been geared towards 2026, there's already, you know, just the way that they're going about building the car, the systems they have placed back at the factory, all these things are just starting to click into place, and things that should have been done years ago, in some cases decades ago, according to James Vowles, are finally there. And I think that is going to result in an uptick. Plus, you have 2 very experienced drivers in a field of quite a few rookies, and I think that's going to shine through, and I think they're going to get some good results. So considering Williams were down in 9th at the end of last year in the Constructors' Championship, it's probably a fairly obvious one, but I can see them being regular contenders for points.
Yeah, that was going to be my answer. I would also throw maybe Merck in as an honorable mention. 4th last year, you know, maybe could be 2nd this year. You know, if maybe, you know, given how close that gap is, given that Red Bull have dropped off. I mean, I don't know if it's, you know, 4 wins last year. It's hard to improve on that year to year, but I can see them winning a lot more than that this year if the car is as good as it looked in testing.
Again, I think that's sort of what, like what Laz was saying, like, how are you defining outperforming? Like, is it speed over one lap? Is it like points? Is it just moving up in positions? And I think like that's kind of where I went with Williams, because there's just so much opportunity to do better. From ninth, if they finished, sixth, that'd be great. From Mercedes, I guess, to go from fourth to second, there's part of me that's like, well, that's sort of where they should be. So I almost,
that's fair.
You know what I mean? So it's sort of like, to me, that doesn't feel like it's like a, yes, you really outdid yourself. You did great this year.
And Williams were becoming, like Laurence said, like from absolute doldrums 12 months ago. So I think that would be a fair call.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So we have a sort of like a little special guest in this program here today, because my poor daughter is stuck with me for the day.
Hello.
She's 11.
Hey,
and she loves me. But she doesn't necessarily love motorsports. So how many Formula One drivers can you name? Ready, set, go.
Max Verstappen, George Russell, Lewis Hamilton.
Nice.
I can't name.
We're at 3. We got a ways to go. Well, we got
3. I mean, that's
anyway.
If there's going to be 3, that's a pretty good 3 to start with.
They're pretty decent ones, but I brought her in on that one because the next one is the first person Max will have a beef with will be blank, and she is here because she has one of the names that she just said is my guess.
I can guess who it is. Mr. George Russell.
Ding, 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 ding.
Sorry, Finn, I didn't mean to steal that answer from you if you wanted to jump in with it. Sorry.
No, you're good. Why, is that yours too?
Yeah, it was. Well, I wrote a few things down here, and I just put and this was woke up a couple of hours ago with the jet lag, and I put Max beef ... with the world. But I don't know if you can have a beef with the world first.
But I also put like Red Bull. I actually put RB.
Yeah.
Not like driver. It could be his own team.
I think really Gianpiero Lambiese is going to, get it in the neck if that car's not where it should be at the first race. Yeah. And the signs from testing is that car is not where it should be. Now, it's not because Max has anything actually against his race engineer GP, but he's the first point of contact when Max is in the car. And, we've heard it many times before when the car isn't behaving as it should. Those two can get quite heated in a way. I mean, GP is actually very good at keeping Max in check. But I think that would be the first person that Max is upset with. And it may be as early as the first practice session if that car is just not doing what he needs to do. The other one I had down is the FIA, because, we've got this swearing ban that has kind of evolved over the winter into some fairly big fines along the way. And we know how Max likes to test the boundaries a bit with stuff like that. So perhaps there'll be something with the FIA, or maybe it'll be something brand new with the FIA, because, it seems that every race we go to, there's new beef between the drivers as a collective and the FIA. So that's the other one I had down.
We're not mentioning the fact that it could be Lewis again, because the fact he's back, he's maybe back in a car that can win some races. Maybe Max has dropped a little bit too far behind, but Lewis was really the only driver that has shown you how you race Max. Everyone else should follow that. So if they start colliding again, if that was to happen, could be. That's kind of why I thought the world, because with Max, there's just such a history with so many people. You could see it being anyone. So I think my official answer would be, I would hedge it and say the world, but pushing George Russell at the top.
But I mean, I guess you could also make the argument that the world has kind of already started. I mean, if you think about how Red Bull has gone about like them being booed at the F175 event, like it's the whole
that's true.
Us against the world vibes have already been put out there.
Yeah, and as well, you kind of get the impression we've been talking about this, Laurence and I, and with our media colleagues. You get a bit of the impression this year that just the way Max was so sarcastic and flippant with all of our questions in Bahrain, it feels like he's not really checked by Red Bull when he does that stuff. And I just feel like he's carrying that attitude into the season of, I'm going to be like this. None of you can do anything about it, and that's just kind of the way he is. And we'll see if that, with Max, it always is exacerbated if things aren't going too well, which is the case with a lot of top running drivers. So, if they're really in the doldrums come kind of Miami, I think we'll really see a different side to Max we haven't seen for a little while.
The other thing we should say is that actually, we talk about Max having beef with people as if it's a negative thing. It's actually one of his strengths. It's one of the things that gets him fired up, even when it is with his own team. He's always pushing to the absolute limit. And then be it with Lewis, I don't feel like there was afterwards, okay, you know, they weren't the best of mates after 2021, but I don't think either of them held it really personally against each other. There were other factors at play, but Max really used that, you know, really used that during the season to do the things that he needed to do to keep himself in the championship and eventually take it. So I think with all F1 drivers, you need this edge. You need this ability to have a beef with other people, even if it's just within your own head, just to get yourself fired up and get the maximum from yourself, which is something Max does just so consistently compared to almost any other driver on the grid.
I guess slight tangent here, but like almost not really. Like if this really is a Max against the world situation, or if this is a Max against his own team situation, especially if like the first handful of races start to, you know, not go the direction he wants it to. Like the rumors have been for how long now that when his contract is up, if not earlier, Max is out of Red Bull. And now it's sort of like gaining momentum that it could be Max to like Mercedes. Like how much validity should we be paying, like giving those thoughts, that idea?
I think Toto definitely would take him in a heartbeat. I think that's been pretty clear. What was interesting coming out of the new Netflix series was Toto Wolff saying that he'd promised Lewis he wouldn't talk to Max while Lewis was at the team, and then obviously then started talking to Max last year. What's been quite interesting this week is Ziggo Sport used to be the Dutch broadcaster for Formula One, and one of their old commentators tweeted that there was a rumor going around that when Verstappen landed back after testing, Toto Wolff's plane landed right after his, and then they left very quickly after each other. Jos Verstappen tweeted that this guy was talking nonsense the other day. But I do think that, you know, if you're looking to the future and you're kind of weighing it all up, Mercedes does seem like a really attractive place for someone like Max to go. The engine thing next year, I'm not sure if Red Bull are going to be in the best place. So I think Toto Wolff would be massively interested. And there's a backstory here as well, right? Like Toto Wolff wishes he'd got Max back when Max was a teenager and nearly had him by all accounts, you know, nearly got him to Mercedes, but Red Bull were able to turn around and say, well, we can actually put Max straight in an F1 car. You know, Mercedes are going to have to let you wait for a little bit. You know, they're not really sure where you'll go. They went straight in with Toro Rosso, and obviously, you know, that worked perfectly because by the next year he was winning a race with Red Bull. So I think there's always been that regret there, and yeah, and the fascinating thing there is if Toto does sign Max, is that replacing Russell? I mean, because you know Antonelli seems to be the longer term option there, but then obviously if Antonelli has a pretty rubbish first year, then he's probably the obvious candidate. But then also, is he entertaining the idea of putting George and Max in the same car? Like, would he do that? So again, there's reasons you could say he's not going to be interested, but I think any team boss who could get Max Verstappen or thinks it's a realistic chance is going to go after him.
That's what I was just thinking there. Like, yeah. I can't think of any person who would be like, oh, you have the opportunity to get Max. No, thanks.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, we'll skip this time. We'll stick with what we got. Like no one's doing that. I think the thing that with Max that's so interesting is he genuinely never seems that interested to talk about moves. A lot of the stuff that comes out is usually generated by Mercedes talking to the media, or you know his dad talking to the media, his manager talking to the media. Red Bull. Max always, I don't know if Lawrence maybe sees this the same way or not, but Max does seem to generally just be like, look, I don't really care about all of this talk and stuff. I'm sure he wants to know if he can win championships beyond this year. But it doesn't, with some drivers, you know, they willingly talk about the future in their press conferences. Max never really does. So you wonder how much of this is kind of the drama around Max. And Max, one of his most endearing traits is he just kind of gets on with it. He doesn't really care for all of this chat around it. So that part of it really fascinates me too, because last year when he was kind of in the eye of that storm, I was in Saudi when we were asking him about will he leave with Helmut Marko potentially going. That was the only time he categorically said, if Marko leaves, I leave. It was the only time he'd really put his neck on the line and said, yeah, like, that's what's at stake. Otherwise, he's been pretty coy about the whole thing. So, yeah, no smoke without fire. I remember dismissing out of hand the idea that Lewis would go to Ferrari. So, you know, we saw how that turned out. So you can't say it will never happen. But, yeah, hard one to see. But, yeah, I guess one of the big storylines for the year to watch out for.
The thing about Max, though, like, it's not just that he doesn't, like, care. He's also the guy, like, he's never going to be a Lewis Hamilton who's out there still racing at 40, not in Formula One. Like, he's talked already about like retirement and moving on to do other things. But I think that is the thing that's so hard to understand about Max, because it's very hard to be in the position that he's in, to be, 20, is he 27 now?
Yeah, I think
he's 27. Yeah, he's 27. But to be a 27-year-old who has not only like already achieved like your life's dream, your life, like what you set out to do, he's done it several times already. Like, so to have that already done and dusted, it's really hard to wrap your mind around the fact that like, what else does he actually have to prove? He doesn't need the money. So honestly, at this point, he's in it for love of the game. And if he's not loving it and it starts to be something that is like a job to him in like the truest sense of the word, why would he want to stick around? Why would he want to?
He's mentioned that a lot. One of the things he does talk about is how many races there are. The fact we've got all these sprint races coming in as well. And he, in his mind, a perfect F1 season, I think, would be about kind of 15 races. And, you know, you'd have a bit of time to himself. He's also about to become a father as well for the first time, which I think is, you know, a big point in anyone's life to decide and put their priorities in order. So it'll be interesting to see how it changes. I think, you know, if we talk about where he doesn't speculate so much on the future, I mean, the truth is he's never left Red Bull as yet. We know there were talks last year, but as yet that hasn't happened. And the progress up until now has been fairly linear with Red Bull. Okay, there were, you know, ups and downs along the way, but it's gone towards success and these 4 world championships in the last 4 years. The interesting thing will be if that stops, and then what happens? Where do you go? And Mercedes, I think, is a very obvious option into the new regulation cycle. And then the other one, which we talked about previously, and again, another one he's closed down, is Aston Martin. But the other thing, if you listen very carefully to what Max says, he doesn't rule an awful lot out. Like he often says, oh, I have a contract until 2028. Well, that's true, but doesn't mean he's going to see it out. And he never really gives the indication that he absolutely will see it out. He tends to row back a bit when that's really, you know, put to him. It's like, well, where you be in 28? He's like, well, you know, we don't know. No one knows.
Maybe he's talking about the Mercedes contract he's signed till 2028. He's not telling us.
Heard it here first. Nate Saunders exclusive right there.
There you go. That clip's just going to be on social without any context. Now. me confirming the move that hasn't happened yet.
Nate Saunders said this.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Back to this weekend. This is like a double, like a 2 for 1. Blank will start on pole in Australia, but blank will win the race.
I'm going to jump in immediately with the obvious one, which is Lando Norris takes pole, but Oscar Piastri wins the race, because we know McLaren look very quick. We know Lando tends to be quicker over a single lap than Oscar Piastri, but I think Oscar's fired up this year, home race. Lando does have a tendency to lose first place on the opening lap or you know, early on in a race. So I think if he lost it to Oscar in the, you know, first corner or something like that, he'd really struggle to get it back.
I'm going to keep the McLaren victory theme, but I'm going to say Charles Leclerc takes pole, and then Oscar Piastri wins the race. I know all of us want to see Lewis win his first race, but being here, I think Piastri winning Australia would also just be unbelievable, you know, to kick off the season. And also, and also just the dynamic of the McLaren team. If he kicked off the year by winning, you know, that situation at McLaren suddenly becomes incredibly difficult as well. So like Charles on pole, we know how good he is in qualifying. That car seems quicker, but then the McLaren over race distance seems to be in a slightly different kind of league at the moment. So I would say Piastri.
Okay, so I have Leclerc on pole, but I have Lando winning the race. Because as we all know, I
think one of us had to say Lando, otherwise it was very harsh on him.
So, what was that?
I was saying one of us had to say Lando because it's very harsh on him otherwise. So I think that's a really fair call.
We haven't compared notes or anything either. All right. Blank will win their first Grand Prix in 2025, as in first career Grand Prix.
I'm going to double down on my Kimi Antonelli kind of, you know, bigging up and say that he's the obvious choice, actually. If you think like cars that are going to be able to win a race, realistically in a normal race, it's going to be 4. And I think that makes it even tougher for teams outside of those top 4 teams to win, just because each of those ones, you know, if something goes wrong for another team in top 4, it's likely, you know, one of the other 3 are going to come through. So, Antonelli, I think he's got the pace, the talent, and if things just go his way in a race, or Mercedes have a car race similar to last year, where certain conditions, be it in the cold weather or certain track layouts, play to their strengths, then I think Antonelli's got the pace within him to do it. And I think we'll surprise. You know, there's a lot of expectation that he's going to make mistakes along the way. I suspect that will happen, but, you know, I can also see a situation where the pressure's on, but he rides through it and takes victory.
Yeah, I think Antonelli. I mean, there's only really two guys that can probably win a race in the as rookies, which is him and Lawson. And if Red Bull aren't in a great spot, it's hard to really see Lawson winning a race. I actually asked him, "Do you think you can win in your first year?" And he kind of suggested, like, well, obviously you want to win. My target is to just be up there, be in the mix. And I don't think Red Bull think he can, think that they're going to be challenging regularly. So I'd say Antonelli as well. And I mean that would be huge. I mean, I think if he wins one of the first 4 races, he actually beats Max's old record for the youngest driver to ever win a race as well. So if he does it early on, he's in the record books forever as well, which would be pretty cool.
I think he's the obvious choice, but also no. No one will win their first race this season. I hate to be like the poo-pooer and the Debbie Downer, but I think the competition between like the main contenders is going to be so good. And there are so many drivers that, like, you've got Lewis, you've got Leclerc, you've obviously got both McLaren drivers, you've got Max, you've got George. I feel like it would have to be like one of those weird races where like it rained. The first half is like just the front end of the field just gets destroyed. And like Kimi's like the only one left, like maybe, possibly, but I'm not banking on it. Fine, done. I'm the Debbie Downer. Which race is going to be the best of the season?
I don't know if best race of the season, but I'm going to throw something that's a bit left field. There's this chat in the paddock about this change in rules about the wings, right? Which is Spain. Is that right, Laz?
Yeah.
So, and I think the ban is for Spain, isn't it? It's not. Yeah. That's the first race where. So I actually think that will be the best race in terms of if that actually does make a crazy change of the order and suddenly it flips it around, which I heard some people whispering, that they think that might be the case. Spain could just be suddenly like, wow, the season's completely different now. It's like flipped on a dime. So a bit of a weird one, but if we're going for hot takes, I would say Spain will just be one where we're like, oh my word, like the season we thought we had isn't maybe the one that we now have got for the rest of the year.
I love that prediction because it's traditionally not a great race, isn't it? And that's actually
exactly. And it usually and it's the last one in Barcelona as well before they switch over to Madrid. So and I wasn't going for the circuit. That wasn't me saying, oh, the circuit would be great. But in terms of story, I think that could be a big one.
I'm going to say Abu Dhabi goes down to the final race. We have 4 drivers in contention for the title. Okay, I'm dreaming a bit big here, but let's say we do. And it goes down to the final race and we have something akin to 2021, but without the controversy, but the same level of excitement.
What if Monaco is great?
Yeah, Monaco, I just popped into my head with the new rule.
The new rules. Like, yeah. I sort of like jokingly say it tongue in cheek, but like, what if the new rules really do make it a great race? What if? Otherwise, my guess, like realistically, Montreal, maybe?
The thing with Monaco that's interesting as well is if that change is made and Monaco's still, in the eyes of a lot of people, very processional.
Yeah.
I think F1 have put themselves in a really tricky position with that race now, because if you introduce a gimmick to make it better, if it's still not markedly better, then suddenly it's like, well, what do you do now? You can't go back to the old format that you basically admitted was terrible because you had to change it, but the new one was still. And then you've got to be like, well, is the circuit just not really kind of right for these big chunky cars they have now? So I don't know. I hope Monaco can put on a spectacle, because obviously it would suck if that dropped off the calendar. But I don't know. Part of me thinks that could have kind of created a rod for Monaco's back a little bit.
But in Monaco, you have to accept that it is a track where it's incredibly difficult to overtake and all that. But it has this extra level of excitement. The fact that the barriers are so close, the fact that there's so little margin for error, the fact, these races can just spin on a single red flag and all that kind of stuff. And, kind of be kind to it a little bit, because there's plenty of other tracks that, are not the best racing tracks in the world, or, deliver dull racing. We just talked about Spain. I just said Abu Dhabi. Traditionally, that actually creates pretty dull racing. I'd say there's a lot more pressure on other races, because Monaco still provides a spectacle. And it's still like, you still have that what if in, the final 10 laps of the race. What if someone towards the back of the field makes an error and goes into the barriers, and that completely opens up the race at the front? You just have to appreciate it for what it is, rather than say that it needs to absolutely be as exciting as every other race on the calendar, because you can't have that for every race, because there's always going to be tracks that have less overtaking or more, just by the nature of having a variety of circuits.
I think it's just quite extreme with Monaco, isn't it? Because, even Spain as an example, like one of the things that annoys me about Spain is just it basically becomes this DRS fest, doesn't it, during the race, where you've got people just overtaking each other with the DRS, but you've at least got, that things changing. Traditionally, people can go into different strategies, which, is where this new rule might help things with Monaco. But what's interesting, I think when you talk to a lot of newer fans about Monaco, I'm not sure if the same love and affinity is there than it might have been for a lot of older fans. My biggest thing, if they're going to do a gimmick with Monaco, I think you completely throw the conventions out. You flip it round and you say the main event, the points, is going to be qualifying. Because that, to me, is the most exciting part of Monaco, is that one lap. You give everyone one lap, or whatever. That is where the drivers are actually pushing the cars like crazy through there. That they're brushing the wall. Like, that is one of the most exciting sessions in a Formula One season. And then it's always a bit deflating when, to me, sometimes the race, you're like, it just didn't live up to yesterday. You got a lot of the guys driving kind of below the capability of the car to get it back home. So I don't know. And I suppose that's always going to be the case in a place like Monaco. But yeah, it just seems to be a bit more extreme with that one. But I definitely don't want to see it disappear. So hopefully this year is a lot better.
I also think that sometimes it's, what the Monaco conversation to me a lot of times is like when you have a driver who's great like Max. Oh, we can't appreciate Max because he's too good. He's dominating everything. There's the history element to Monaco that like people are like, oh, but it's not great racing. It's like, it's not the what have you done for me lately track, right? And I feel like that does a disservice to Monaco and the history, and like it belongs on the schedule. It should be on the schedule. And not every race track can give you 1,600 lead changes. Like that's just not the way that it is. So appreciate, like Lauren said, appreciate Monaco for what it is and what it has meant for Formula One and the stars that it's produced, but also like pay attention to what the cars have to do, pay attention to what the drivers have to do, and the fact that they really are on the edge, lap after lap, turn after turn. And if you can't appreciate that, then maybe you sort of need to reevaluate how you're watching all of the racing as well. The last predictions, super easy because they're the big ones. Rookie of the Year, Constructors Champion, Drivers Champion. Let's start with Rookie of the Year. Honestly, tell me why it won't be Kimi Antonelli.
Does Liam Lawson count as a rookie? Do we count him as a rookie? Just to figure out who we're dealing with.
Yes, but like, no.
Yeah. It's a weird one, isn't it? Because like, I think conventionally he is one. He's it's the first year he's gone into a season as a confirmed driver, right? But
yes,
he's also got, it's weird, isn't it? It'd be like if someone in the NFL draft this year, it's like, well, he actually played for the Seahawks last year, but he's a rookie. Like
11 times over the last 2 years as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, if it's just
through some weird quirk, he's still a rookie. Like, so it is a strange one.
It's a tricky one, but I think, let's assume he is. I think he's got the potential perhaps to really impress everyone. Let's say it doesn't go so well for Kimi Antonelli. I think everyone knows my views, having listened to the podcast so far, that I think Kimi's going to perform. But if he doesn't, then who's the next one that's going to step up and really stand out? And I think, that's a great shout. Ollie Behrman, another one. If Nate's prediction comes true that he beats Ocon, that is a significant feat over a rookie season, I would say. And then the other one, which I think is going to go under the radar, but worth trying to keep an eye on, is Gabriel Bortoletto in the Sauber, because he's going up against Nico Hülkenberg, probably at the back of the grid. It seems very unlikely that Sauber are going to be really even challenging for points, considering so much of their focus is on 2026 with Audi coming in. But just to keep an eye on how he does against Hülkenberg will be interesting, because Hülkenberg's a good barometer of how good a driver is. He's got all that experience, clearly very quick over one lap. If Bortoletto can live with him, then probably should get excited about it. But my answer is Kimi Antonelli. After all.
Yeah. And we've gone back full circle.
Yeah. And also I think Antonelli's just in the best position to really stand out as well. As soon as he gets a podium or two, it's very difficult to look beyond, to say, it's the thing with F1, isn't it? Like, Bortoletto, I think, is actually going to be really exciting generally, but it's hard to say if someone who finishes, like, you look at his record in the year, it will be like 17th, 12th, 13th, 15th. 70. It's hard to say, oh, he deserves to be Rookie of the Year, because you might be able to turn to Antonelli and say, well, look, he won a race and he finished on the podium 5 times. But relatively speaking, it might have been a better year from one to the other. So I would say Antonelli too.
That's actually how I feel about Ollie Bearman. I feel like Bearman has the opportunity to be really good. He's just not going to have the same opportunity because his equipment doesn't quite live up to the same standards as a Mercedes. So it depends a little bit on how you are setting the parameters for, again, the same thing, like how are you outperforming? But if you're just looking at like podiums or race finishes, I just don't know how you don't go with Antonelli. The Constructors' Championship, for like the longest time, it was Mercedes or it was Red Bull. And then last year we had McLaren breakthrough. What's going to happen in 2025?
I keep changing. I've changed my mind on these on constructors and drivers all year. It's so difficult as well, because it's so difficult to know how big the McLaren advantage is, and it's early in the season. But based on driver strength alone, I'm going to say Ferrari they go better than last year, and they managed to beat McLaren to the constructors. Just with that driver lineup, with the fact that they were improving late last year, I say they pit McLaren to it. But it's a tough one. It's a tough one to pick, because McLaren seems like the more obvious answer right now, just given testing. But yeah, I've got Ferrari tugging at me a little bit, at the heartstrings. So I'd say them.
It is a really difficult decision. Of course, that's what makes this season so exciting at this stage, at least. I mean, we might get 2 or 3 races in and realize that it's all very obvious and we should have all picked X team. But I'd say McLaren to defend it. I think, they've just got such a rich vein of form that they're tapping in terms of bringing performance to the car. And I'm not sure, even though Ferrari finished the end of last year very well, I think the early signs are that maybe, they've made some big changes over the winter to the car. Whether that's going to all stick is tricky. And then you have this balance this year between, do you chase a championship in 2025 or do you start putting your focus towards 2026? And it's not just 2026, remember, it's basically the next 5 years of a regulation cycle, potentially leading even further. And at what point do you say, right, enough's enough? And if Ferrari don't make the start that, I suppose that quite a few of us hope they would, to put Lewis and Charles in the mix this year, then at what point do they go, right, okay, we've still got Lewis for next year. Let's reset. Let's just make sure we get 26 right. I think that starting this season well, as McLaren appear to be about to do, is going to be key, because then you don't have to worry so much about adding the development to this car. You will a little bit, but then you've also got that easier balance with 26.
I think I agree with both of you. It's hard to overlook McLaren. So it's like McLaren is like my 1A, and then it's like a 1B for Ferrari. And I think it's everything that you just said, Laz. Like from Monza on last year, they were heading in exactly the right direction. And it wasn't that McLaren wasn't, but I look at sort of Ferrari this year. What makes me think it's possible is based on what McLaren did last year. Because like they showed up, was it Miami? They showed up with like 9 upgrades, and we sort of joked like they basically brought a brand new car. But look at what those upgrades did. Like when they brought that in and they made the tweaks, they went from a very, very mediocre at best car to winning the Constructors' Championship. And if Ferrari isn't exactly where they want to be, they might not be that far off, or then they're really going to take it to McLaren. So that was one of the harder questions for me. But I think in the end, I'm going to go with you have to beat McLaren, because they're the ones who have the current title. And then the last but not least, the drivers' champion.
I'll put my next straight on the line. Oh, go on, unless you want to, Laz, but I'm happy to.
No, you go first, and then I'll hopefully it won't be the same. It might be, actually.
Yeah, well, this is the one that has been changing around, because obviously it depends on where you think. But I'm going to say Lando Norris, because he's the favorite coming into it. And I know everyone's like, oh, Charles going to beat Lewis the title. But I think we've all been a little bit harsh on Lando. I think there were some things he definitely struggled with last year. Like Laurence has mentioned earlier, the starts, not converting them, still a big weakness of his. But he still won 4 times last year. And that drive in Abu Dhabi last season basically won McLaren the constructors when Piastri got turned around by Max. So he showed massive mettle under pressure there. And I think he's actually kind of relishing this role as favourite. It's the first year he's come into a season where it's not like, well, look, we're starting slowly, but we want to come back to it. And yeah, and for him, I think his one mental weak point is Max. How to race against Max. And Max might be out of the equation, especially early on. And I think that that could be a big thing. So, I mean, maybe Piastri becomes a sore spot for him, but Norris seems to be the more well-rounded of those two guys. So I would say Lando wins it. But yeah, I would back Piastri to make it tough for him. I'd back the Ferrari drivers to get some wins in there too. But over the course of a season with that car, if it's ahead, I think you've got to say Lando based on last year, based on what we've seen from McLaren so far.
That's all very convincing and actually a very good argument and a very sensible argument. I'm going to say what I said, I think, in January when we had these similar conversations in various bits we were doing, and say Max Verstappen. Because if the car is a complete horror show, then sure, like it's not going to be possible. But if it's within a few tenths, and especially if it's as quick when it's driven on the very limit, which we know Max can do, that could end up with a situation like last year. And he's so ruthless. And also, if you're in that situation and the team can fully focus on one driver, because, it would be a huge amount to expect Liam to keep up with Max this season. I don't really think anyone in the team or outside the team is expecting that. That's not really, the level of success for Liam is actually much lower than that. It's just, being consistently in and around the podium. But yeah, if Max can be right at the front and McLaren are juggling a title battle between Norris and Piastri, Ferrari are juggling a title battle between Leclerc and Hamilton, and Red Bull are just about there, I think Max could make the difference and take the Drivers' Championship. A little bit boring because it'd be a fifth one in a row, but I think it would be by far the most exciting to watch since 2021, just because of where everyone is going into the season.
First of all,
also a very convincing argument. So, yeah.
I think Max is dramatic. Even if the car is a quote unquote horror show, like 18 other drivers on the grid would probably like happily jump into his horror show of a car. Okay, maybe 18 is an exaggeration, but a solid 15 would jump into that car. So like Max's definition of a horror show is still probably like fantastic. I kind of went with Leclerc as my pick to win the Drivers' Championship. I think I'm leaning towards Lando. Nate, like my argument is like the exact same as yours. Like there's a huge part of me that's like, you see it across a lot of sports, and like you oftentimes see a team lose a championship or get really close to a championship. And it especially when it happens before they're ready for it or before they're like projected to be there, you have to see them lose that one championship first before they can come back and actually be ready for it. They have to like learn how to win the championship. And it is a long season, and you have to have the ability to make mistakes and let them go. And you have to have the ability to have the occasional run-in with another driver who happens to be your friend and not have it get to you. And those were all things that like he really hadn't had to deal with, did Lando, until last year. And I think he really did learn a lot for it. And I think he's more prepared to be in that spotlight than he's ever been. And he has obviously the car. The one thing that I feel like I can't sort of like shake with Leclerc is like, he's fast, he's driven. And the X factor for him this year is you brought in this other guy. And everyone else is looking at the other guy because the other guy is the freaking GOAT. But I've been here the longest, and you kept me for a reason. And there's like a quiet confidence about him. And like, he just kind of goes with it. And I just, so for that reason, like I can't shake the Leclerc thing. And maybe that's why I'm like, yeah, he's going to finish ahead of Lewis, I think, all season long. Like, yeah, Lewis is going to have good races, whatever. But I think when it comes to the end of it, I think it's going to be Leclerc in the driver's standings ahead of Lewis. And I wouldn't be shocked if he won the championship. But in the end, I'm going to go with Lando. So
it is interesting. Sorry, Nicole, to cut you off, but it's interesting, isn't it, that none of us even mentioned Lewis really in our conversation? Because I agree with you. I think that it feels like Charles in that position is maybe the strongest over the course of a season. And yeah, it's a funny one because I've looked at a lot of other places doing predictions, and Charles features quite heavily in a lot of them, but Lewis never does.
Like, why?
You know,
Why is it though? Like, because if you look at Ferrari and you look at, like, particularly this weekend, if you look at this weekend, I mean, look what Carlos Sainz did a year ago in Melbourne. 14 days, 2 weeks off of having his emergency appendectomy. He went into Melbourne and he won the race. Obviously, that's not his car anymore. That's Lewis's car. Like, is it just because we don't want to, like, is it because we don't want to believe it can happen so quickly? Like, are we allowing ourselves to be like, to not be disappointed? Like, why wouldn't he be in the same position that Sainz was in a year ago?
I think we're very aware of the challenge that Lewis faces. And if you really think about it and how difficult it is and how good Leclerc is in an equal car, you know, is he going to do it? But the one thing that I've learned from my time in Formula One, which is not as long as Lewis is, but, you know, I came in kind of, you know, after a few years into his career, is that you never underestimate him. You know, never, ever underestimate Lewis Hamilton, because when he made that move from McLaren to Mercedes, everyone said, oh, you know, this is a disaster. Why is he doing it? He's leaving the winning team, the team that gave him his big shot. And then within a year, obviously 2013, he won one race, but within a year, everything was bang in place for him to start winning again. And it would be so Lewis, wouldn't it, to go there? Everybody kind of like thinking, well, it's such a big challenge, you know, he's not going to be able to do it, and then just nail it on the first race. And again, I think something we talked about a couple of podcasts ago is that Lewis is so invigorated, so inspired by this challenge, that we could get that something special that, you know, we know is within Lewis, and we hope we will see again, but we haven't seen for a few years now. You know, that kind of Singapore qualifying lap in 2017, I think it was, or 2018. And then, you know, just those extra special performances where he's able to find something within the tires, within the management of them, that just makes a victory happen. I could actually see all of that coming together. This weekend
it's why this year is so like it's the hardest year I can ever remember sitting here. Usually you're like, yeah, it'll be Max, or yeah, it'll be Lewis. This one, like every time someone else suggests a new one, you're like, actually, yeah, I think it'll be him now.
For a million reasons, we shouldn't overlook Lewis Hamilton. But yet, for a million reasons, there are a lot of people looking at Leclerc. And it's like Laz just said, you could make an argument for 5 drivers to win almost every race of the season. And you can make the same argument for those same 5 drivers to win the Drivers' Championship. Some have better arguments than others, but like the potential is there. Like if somebody was really like closer than we thought in testing, and then they come in with the right upgrades throughout the season, and then boom, rattle off a bunch of race wins, maybe we're looking at Mercedes and a George Russell championship. Like, I mean, it's not out of the realm of possibility. Probably is, but it's not like the craziest thing I've ever said in my life. When it comes to this weekend and the first race of the season, what is the more likely scenario? Lewis Hamilton going into the Ferrari and getting his first win with Ferrari in the first race of the season, or the Red Bull, as Max has said, we're not going to be able to compete for the win. The Red Bull being just an absolute disaster of a car. Like, what is the more likely, realistic situation?
That's a tough one.
Yeah, that is tough. So we've just run a piece I wrote. I'm going to say Lewis winning. Sorry, was it which is more realistic? Well,
yeah, what is more realistic?
I would say Lewis winning over Red Bull. I don't think Red Bull have got it so wrong that they're in a complete disaster. I think they might have a difficult start, but I don't think fundamentally they've fallen that far off the front. But Lewis is actually following in some pretty famous footsteps of people that could have won their first race for Ferrari. It's actually we've just written a piece. It's on ESPN.com right now. I think it's Fangio. There was a guy called Giancarlo Baghetti who did it, who's quite forgettable driver. But then Mario Andretti did it. His first F1 win was his first race with Ferrari. Mansell did it. Raikkonen did it. Of course, Raikkonen, the last driver to win the championship. And Alonso did it. First race in, they won the title. And it does seem to be something that a lot of drivers, when they get to Ferrari, they have success very early on. Vettel won his second race in 2015, for example. So I could see that happening. And to Lawrence's point, he's invigorated. You know, he's just coming to a place where there's so much buzz around him. So I could see that happening. Red Bull being in trouble, I don't know. It felt like they were kind of coming out of that a little bit towards the end of last year.
Yeah, there was a lot in the test at the end. I think this is what kind of gave this opinion that Red Bull are struggling, that they were doing a lot of stuff which you might not expect them to do at that stage of a test, especially with a car that should be as evolved as it is this long into a regulation cycle, and clearly still struggling with it. The lap count was the lowest, I think, of any team. And so there were enough warning signs that the car is troublesome. Plus, it seems like when they were changing things on the car setup wise, they weren't always getting the answers they were expecting. And that is a tricky situation to be in. But as I said earlier, I think Max actually has the ability to drive around a lot of that. And perhaps that's why Red Bull are kind of in the position they're in, is because so often they can rely on Max to drive around it. You know, they can put this very peaky performance on a car, and Max can just live with it right on the very edge, whereas other drivers or his teammates usually can't. So I think we could go there, and I think it's going to be very tricky for Liam, unfortunately, just because of the nature of everything going on and the stage he's at in his career and how peaky that car looks. But yeah, I could also see Max just getting there and getting a podium or even better, just because that's just what he does, and he can live with cars which aren't really behaving in the way that they should be at this stage.
You can drive a shoebox. I think I said that last week. Like,
that's right.
If the car is really that bad, we're going to see it in the other driver. We're not going to see it from Verstappen. He will still make something happen. He'll complain about it. But I've also, I think, heard him complain about a car, like, again, most of the other drivers on the grid would happily jump into. I feel like we've hit on, like, what am I missing going into this weekend? What is like the one thing that we need to be looking out for besides like the obvious storylines?
I think it'll be interesting to see where Aston Martin are. It was another team that in testing were incredibly hard to read. Clearly didn't think things didn't go the way they'd planned, but where they sit in that kind of scrap, and whether, you know, they're going to be right towards the back, which is not going to be a happy place for Fernando Alonso to be if he's finding himself getting knocked out in Q1 still. That would be interesting. And then I guess, but this isn't really just this weekend. This is a much broader topic. How does that evolve now that Newey's there, and you know, can they get this car anywhere to being competitive this year, or is the focus completely on 26? So I think, yeah, just seeing how bad that situation is, it will be interesting at this stage. But to be honest, it'll probably go under the radar because there'll be so much focus on the front, and there's so much to talk about at the front. But I feel like we have kind of covered that fairly well so far.
Got anything?
I'd say Aston's a good call.
All right. I mean, after that, the only thing that's really left to do here is predictions. And I'm super excited that I get to be a part of this year. Although I'd be willing to guarantee I will be trash at this. Absolutely awful.
Wait until you see my predictions, Nicole. I had a pretty bad run last year.
Okay, do we want, like, how do we do this? Like, who wants to go first? Do we start with everyone's like third driver on the podium? Do we just do our 1, 2, 3? What do we want to do? So
we used to do 1, 2, 3, and then I decided to be dramatic one race and do 3, 2, 1, just because I think I was trying to build up to who I was winning, and then
I like 3, 2, 1.
Flipped around. But I'm happy to do either. So yeah, I could do. I'm happy to go 3, 2, 1. I'll say third Max, second Lewis, first Oscar. I don't know what happens to Lando in this scenario, but some drama at the start, gets tangled up at the beginning, has a slow start or something like that. And yeah, that to me would be like a start of old, where a bit chaotic at Melbourne. There was always the races were always kind of frenetic and threw something into the mix, and often didn't replicate what was going to come for the season. So I'm not necessarily saying that's what I think the year will look like. But yeah, those would be my 3.
You said Oscar winning, Lando.
Oscar winning, Lewis second, Max third.
Lewis. Okay. There's second.
Yeah.
Because clearly I'm writing this down because I'm.
Yeah. Oh no. We need a
heat to the fire.
Solid log of evidence this year.
All right, Laz, what do you got?
Okay. I'm going to say Lewis Hamilton gets a podium, finishes third on his Ferrari debut, and it's a McLaren 1-2. Now, I know I said earlier that Lando qualifies on pole, Oscar wins the race, but I'm actually going to switch that around just to have a different answer to Nate and say Oscar Piastri second, Lando Norris wins. I know I've contradicted myself within one podcast, but I do that all the time, so nothing new.
Well, see, I thought the opposite to you. I was like, I've backed myself into a corner now with that earlier prediction, so I had to go with Piastri.
Okay, I'm gonna stick with what I had earlier. I'm gonna say that Leclerc still is on pole, but he does not win the race. I think he's on the podium though. So Leclerc third. Piastri, don't know what's going to happen to him in qualifying, but he's going to have to do a little bit of fighting, and he's going to end up in second. And I'm gonna be consistent, and I'm gonna stick with my theme. Lando wins the race. So 1 Lando, 2 Piastri, 3 Leclerc.
So we're all in on McLaren winning this weekend.
We are.
I think it's where the smart money is. You know, if you look at testing,
Yeah,
if you look at all the build up to this race, if you look at what happened last year, it's where the smart money is. But again, you know, just to keep going on about it, but the great thing about the season is that you can say that and still have zero confidence. Even though all the signs are pointing in that direction.
Yeah. Well,
I'm also really happy to be completely wrong and root for utter chaos.
Absolutely.
I'm fine with that
same.
too.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, thinking about this today, we love narratives in the media, don't we? There is a great reason to get excited by so many different drivers winning. I think that's always the case to a degree, but this year there's just so many different ways. Like Lewis is beating Charles, or Charles is beating Lewis, or Piastri is completely flipping the script around at McLaren. Lando's living up to his billing. Max is doing Max things and just winning out of nowhere. Lawson wins the race. It's like, wow, this guy's pretty good. Antonelli wins the race. So there's like, whichever way you look at it, it's just like, yeah, there's like just great scenarios all over the place. And I just hope that we get that, and not a situation where we get to Sunday and it's like, oh, actually McLaren are a bit further ahead than we all thought. And then it's a little bit of an underwhelming flat feeling, because that, given all the hype of the year, like coming into the season, that would be pretty painful one to digest, I think.
All right, guys, do me a favor. Eat a lot of prawns for me. I think meat pies are trash, but I love a good sausage roll with a little bit of tomato sauce. And enjoy some red wine for me. And
consider it done. That's the easy part of the weekend.
Yeah.
We'll try and do some recording as well if we can, but you know.
And if you're watching at home, like me, and trying to live vicariously through them, thank you for watching, thank you for listening. Remember to leave a comment, hit us up with the like button, hit us with that 5-star review, and remember, you can find us on the ESPN F1 YouTube channel all season long. That's where you can get all of your F1 content. Guys, enjoy the race. We'll talk to you next week.